Hello, I'm Beth Joey and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As I think I announced in my January reading update video, I discovered that I was reading upwards of 10 books a month, which was just too much to go through all in one video for my monthly reading update. So I decided I would give myself a little bit of a break, a little bit of leeway, and instead do more of a every 5 books, I'll do a reading update, let you guys know my thoughts and all that sort of thing. So since then I have read 5 books. First we had The Vanishing Stair by Maureen Johnson, which is the second book in the Truly Devious series. Then we had Fire with Fire by Destiny Soraya, which is a standalone fantasy book. Then we had The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna, which is the first book in a fantasy series. And then finally we had House of Earth and Blood and House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas, the first 2 books in the Crescent City series, and as I'm beginning to realize, a sort of continuation or crossover at the very least with the ACOTAR series. Jumping right into the first book that I read this month, which was The Vanishing Stair by Maureen Johnson, again the second book in the Truly Devious series. I gave this book 4 stars because in my opinion Maureen Johnson just is not able ever to write a boring book. The Truly Devious series follows Stevie, who has recently joined the Ellingham Academy, which is essentially an academy for particularly gifted students. It was founded by Albert Ellingham, who is the center of a mystery in himself. His wife and daughter were kidnapped and wound up dead, and then he mysteriously died quite soon after, so Stevie is really intent on solving that case and figuring out what happened. Then some of her classmates start to go missing, and so she's got a real life case to figure out as well. I have to admit it's definitely frustrating to only be finding out different elements of the mystery as the characters do. There's no sort of added level of insight that you get through being the reader that you sometimes get in some other mysteries, but the payoff at the end is so great that it literally makes my jaw hit the floor every time something is revealed. I think the only thing that was predictable in this particular book was Ellie's plotline. She is a character where some interesting things happen to her in the first book, and the continuation of that is covered at the beginning of the second one. In this book we were also introduced to a character named Fenton, who is essentially a specialist in this sort of case around the Ellinghams and the wife and the daughter going missing. And she was an incredibly interesting character, I have to say, because it's nice to have that adult perspective of this case rather than sort of the teenage crime solvers that we get all the time. But I just wish we had spent a little bit more time with her. And then lastly, there are so many characters at this point that I'm really struggling to keep track. I'm loving this series and I can't wait for the final one to come in. But yeah, I'm hoping it all wraps it up in a nice little bow because I'm beginning to get confused. The next book that I read was Fire with Fire by Destiny Soraya, which is a fantasy standalone book, which I gave 3 stars. Fire with Fire follows 2 sisters, Dani and Eden Rivera, who have been trained all their life to be dragon slayers. Eden is incredibly dedicated to this line of work and incredibly dedicated to her future, whereas Dani is definitely more rebellious and she wants to live a more human life. That is all until Dani meets a dragon and begins to question everything she was taught to believe about their ferocity and the danger of them, and she is thrust into a world of trying to save her sister from the sorcerers that she has joined in the effort to really prove herself. To sum it up shortly, Fire with Fire was sweet. I was somewhat confused about whether this was sort of middle grade or YA, because whilst a lot of it was quite simple and quite immature in terms of the character development and the writing style, it was unexpectedly gory when it came to battle scenes or injuries. The storyline was uncomplicated and still enjoyable, and this is rare for me to say, but I think it could have been longer. It could have been more convoluted, and I definitely would have appreciated it more if it was. It would have been nice to get some more exposure to the sorcerers and also to the dragon slayers and why they became dragon slayers in the first place. Eden, one of the sisters, was probably the most unlikable character that I have ever read, but I could completely understand why, considering she had this constant sibling rivalry and this constant jealousy for this sister that she believed was so much better than she was, and she couldn't understand why everybody wanted her, wanted Dani and not Eden. And then I also found Dani super whiny at the beginning, but she seemed to really grow up a lot once she met the dragon Nox, which I really appreciated. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was simple but enjoyable, so I gave it 3 stars. Next up, I read The Gilded Ones by Namina Fauna, and this was my 1-star read for the month. I really did not like this, which is so disappointing to me because it's been sitting on my bookshelf for the longest time. The Gilded Ones follows Dika, who lives in constant fear of this blood ceremony that will essentially determine whether or not she is pure, aka bleeds red blood, or tarnished or impure if she bleeds gold blood. As these sorts of stories tend to go, she bleeds gold blood. Following a period of time where she's tortured and imprisoned by the people in her village, a strange woman comes to visit her and saves her from this particular situation and brings her to the capital, where they are training up an army of these gold-blooded women. These women are being trained to defeat the Empire's greatest threat because they are the only ones who are believed to be able to do this, but Dika begins to question whether or not they have all been brainwashed. I mean, the first sentence I wrote when I was summarizing this book was, "Oh, the cliches," and it is full of them. The storyline and the simplicity of the writing style really killed me, and it was one of those books that I wished I had DNF'd it before the end, but it was essentially the plot that kind of kept me going, kept me interested. Firstly, the language and the writing style felt really young and simple. It felt quite middle grade, which was confusing because a lot of the battle scenes were quite advanced and quite gory. It didn't flow at all. The character motivations as well were really confusing because some characters were actively encouraging the persecution of a certain species, despite the fact that their entire purpose was to save this species, and it felt incredibly naive at times because yes, these girls are quite young, but the way they were convinced like that to change sides after one speech by Dika, who they didn't even really know or like, didn't flow, it didn't make sense. It just was a massive eye roll cringy moment. I just gave it 1 star because it didn't make sense to me. It lacked flow, it was very immature and naive, and I probably won't be picking up the sequel. And lastly, we have House of Earth and Blood and House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas, both of which I read one after the other. This one was the reread, and this one was obviously brand new, only just released, so I was super excited to pick this up. I am just putting them both back behind me because they are really heavy, but I gave them both 5 stars. I absolutely loved them. I'm not going to go too much into my thoughts on either of these books because I did do a complete reading vlog where I went full on spoilery on these books. So I'm just going to do a quick summary, which is House of Earth and Blood follows Bryce Quinlan, who is a half fae, half human. And she and her friends are considered to be party girls. They're not taken too seriously. That is until one day, Danica, her best friend, and her entire pack of devils, aka pack of wolves, are slaughtered. This sends Bryce into an absolute spiral, and then 2 years later, it all starts to happen again, and so she is recruited to figure out what's happening, find the connection. She is assigned a bodyguard by the name of Hunt Athalar to keep an eye on her and help her with this investigation, and as it is a fantasy romance, I bet you can only guess where that relationship goes. House of Sky and Breath follows on, continuing with this larger investigation that comes to light in House of Earth and Blood. There's not really much I can say about it without getting super spoilery, but it does really delve into a lot of the side characters. There's a lot more perspective, so you get to know some of those characters a bit more that you really enjoyed in the first book. For example, a merman by the name of Tharian and a werewolf by the name of Ethan. Both of these books are probably my favorite books of all time, so please do go and check out that other video, that vlog where I go through all of my thoughts, because these 2 books really deserve that amount of time dedicated to them. So those are the 5 books that I have read since my last update. I really loved most of them. There was only one of them that really kind of let me down. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, if you've loved them, if you've hated them, if you agree with me on any of my thoughts on them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified when I release new content, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!